We've had several of those over the last 10 years. We certainly, at the beginning of the year, as we all know, things changed in terms of ability of how we would produce a video in terms of, at least in the respects of how we've done it in the past, where we typically go on site and do some footage at different communities, usually interview, either current or, past board members and or general members at the chapter level. And then certainly in many cases we've interviewed and had on film, state senators or representatives or other public policy officials. Given, restrictions, if you will, we've taken that approach aside. But we are actually already in production of a video that would be launched probably by end of December. And it will be a little bit different than the past, but it will still be very high value in terms of production value. The major difference that people will see is, rather than seeing individual or different individuals on camera, if you will have effectively a narrator, a voiceover that conducts the video. So the messaging, if you will, and the recruitment retention value for the video will be the same. You'll just, you'll have images and imagery of, all the various, topics that you would expect, but you'll have just one person as a narrator, as opposed to seeing different people on film, if you will, in that context. So we will hopefully be in a position to share that video with all of the chapter presidents. So once it's produced and finalized, we'll send, as we've done in the past, a DVD copy of the video. That video will also be placed on our website. And the other major difference, besides the voiceover compared to the previous videos, when our first video we ever did, probably 15 years ago now, was probably 15 minutes in length. And then we scaled it back and went down to about 10 minutes. This one's probably going to be about in the 3 to 4 minute range, because we think, keep it simple and keep it short. So that's what this will be. So you can still use it in the same manner to introduce as a kind of an opening for your local chapter meetings, and or show it at, when you can go back to doing kind of these welcome breakfast. I know many of you do with new residents moving in, those kind of things. You'll be able to use that, and it'll be very nice. So as soon as that's available, we'll circulate it and let you know how to you get additional copies if you need them, and we'll get that out as quickly as we can. So that will be that expense, because we already got a question yesterday before this meeting. It's not a 2021 expense. It will be a 2020 expense in the FLiCRA budget. So somebody asked that question because they were looking at the budget proposal you'll talk about later. That's why you won't see it in the 2021 budget. So, but we're excited to be able to launch it pretty soon and get a new one out in everybody's hands.
Thanks, Bennett. Hugh, would you lead us, please, in passing and accepting the minutes from last meeting?
Be happy to, Diane. The minutes we're talking about are of last year's minutes of the Board of Directors, Delegates, and Membership meeting, November 7th, 2019. I believe that's the set that was distributed to all our participants. Are there any last minute comments or changes that might affect the minutes as distributed? Hearing none, I would assume they stand as approved.
Thank you, Hugh, very much. And thank you very much, Hugh, for your service in this role and on the board. Unfortunately, we're losing Hugh's membership this year. He's been such a staunch representative of FLiCRA and a support for all of us. Thank you very, very much, Hugh.
Thank you, Diane.
Jim, would you please present to us your treasurer's report?
our
Sorry, Jim, when you start over, we had to unmute you, so if we missed a couple of things, you started with your opening.
Okay.
Sorry.
We prepared the 2020 budget without anticipation of the war against an unknown enemy called COVID-19 and its impact on our association. When March 2020 rolled around and Florida was in lockdown, we immediately wondered what would be the impact on our revenue stream. However, analysis of the dues income up to our most recent financial statement of 30 September of this year, which was included in your packet, our dues are only 0.7% below the same time last year. That's correct, 0.7% below last year. So it appears to me that our membership still sees great value in the Florida Life Care Residents Association, and we thank all our members for continuing their participation. Now let's talk about the expense side of the equation. There are items on the expenses that it's the cost of doing business. We still got to, so to speak, turn the lights on. We have to meet our contractual obligations. We publish, print, and mail our quarterly The Resident Connection, distributed to our members. And its purpose is to keep the membership informed of FLiCRA and its value. However, you notice that there are some items are less, like office supplies, as you would expect. Then you ask, is the staff and the board of directors continuing to travel during this time of pandemic? The absolute answer to that is no. Neither the staff nor the board have traveled since lockdown in March. Then your question is going to be, why is there such an increase or such a large number for travel? And that's because the board meets via teleconference, and those charges for the teleconference are included in that line item. In your packet, as I indicated, is the 20 September financial statement, the last financial statement that we have received. Based on our expected membership dues in the fourth quarter of this year, we expect to have a good 2020 financial end. Madam President, that concludes my report.
Thank you very, very much. And again, Jim, thank you for your care and your determination to make us work properly and to keep us straight. And we thank you for your explanation.
You're welcome.
I ask for a motion to accept the treasurer's report.
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second? You need to unmute yourself to do this.
I second.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone opposed to accepting the treasurer's report as presented?
We accept it and we file it.
Thank you. Then we'll accept your report, Jim, and file it as presented. Okay, so now we move to items that require some action on your part, delegates. And we have the budget to contend with now. Is that, we consider that we have accepted the budget going forward? Is that taken care of now?
No, the membership has to accept it.
The member, Bennett, where are we with the budget for 2021?
Sure. So Mr. Chandra has not actually reviewed the budget. So all he did at this stage was review the current financial statement. So he needs to introduce the budget and review that document that was circulated. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Jim.
When I started my treasury, I talked about COVID-19 as this unknown enemy. I don't have a better crystal ball than anybody else. However, I do expect that sometime in 2021, we'll get back to normal with our new norm, if you want to call it that. So what we have done in creating the budget is that we have taken a conservative approach to our membership by stating that we expect that the membership will increase by 1 percentage point. Bennett and I have had a lot of discussions about what do we expect next year. We have concluded the following. Of course, we've still got to keep the lights on. We've got to meet our contractual obligations. There'll be a slight increase due to inflationary elements in our contracts and some expenses. And we think that later in the year, the chapters are going to begin to meet more. There's going to be an increase in demand for the board of directors and the staff to travel and visit the chapters. The chapters will want more information to distribute to their membership. So balancing those competing factors and looking at the past utilization of what has been accomplished in travel and publication, we came up with what we believe to be the proper value. We built the 2021 budget, which is also in your packet, with an expense increase of 2.6% over what we had budgeted in 2020. The reality is that COVID-19 makes budgeting extremely difficult for 2021. However, past experiences of membership and expenses may not be the best predictors, but it's all we have. And that becomes the basis of our best judgment. So we do expect that there will be an increased demand on travel and publications, and that's the primary reason why the 2021 budget has a 2.6% increase. We still show a net income increase at the end of the year. Madam President, that concludes my 2021 recommendation for the budget.
Thank you, Jim. And with that, I think we look to the delegates to respond. Bennett, how do we handle that now?
Yes, I'm just trying to see they are able to use the question and answer. So I'm just waiting to see if any questions get posed. And so we'll give them a minute just to see if there's any that they get posed. Quite a few people have been able to already use the Q&A for other things that we've answered offline. So just let me see if there's any questions that get posed on the financial or excuse me, the budget. So we'll give them a few minutes just to see if they have any questions that we need to follow up or give context to. So again, if we have on the screen, if you're wanting to ask a question on this or any other topics as we go through the course of the agenda, you'll use the Q&A, which is at the top, and then we'll be able to respond. Okay. Now, at least from one delegate posed a statement effectively that they don't have any questions. So we'll just give a second here just to see if there's any others. Okay, let me see. Okay, a couple of folks raised their hand. Lauren, do you want to unmute the folks that raised their hand? I know it's Howard Ehrlich and Eileen Nichols. You want to do that, Lauren?
Yes, I will do that now.
Okay. So those that raised your hand, just give us a minute and we'll unmute you to ask a live question.
Okay, I have asked Mr. Ehrlich to unmute himself to ask the question.
Okay. I can answer one live question because we got this question before the meeting too from another chapter. Member dues, in terms of the dues amounts, if you will, for singles, couples, and life memberships, there are no changes to the dues for 2021. So we can take that out of your anxiety if you have it. No changes to that. So Mr. Ehrlich, do you want to unmute and ask your a live question? If not, we're going to switch to Eileen Nichols and come back to Mr. Ehrlich. So Eileen Nichols, you're welcome to, if you unmute, well, you can ask a live question.
Okay, I've unmuted. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my question is about the NACRA dues, the $500 for NACRA dues. I'm just wondering, who does that cover? Because I joined NACRA at my chapter in Leesburg, chapter 140, and it's $25 for me. And hopefully we'll pass that on every year to the president of our chapter. But I just wonder what the $500 covers for the board.
Sure. Sure. Mr. Tranger, would you like me to answer that one? I can. It's pretty simple, Ms. Nichols. So NACRA has different categories of membership, and one category that they do have is for state associations. So FLiCRA has consistently chosen, and it's a board decision, to pay to belong as a state association member of NACRA, and that's an annual fee of $500 that we pay. I think our renewal is every May is when our renewal comes up, but that's what that figure represents.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think Mr. Guyton Wade has a question. He wants to ask a live question. Mr. Wade, if you'll unmute, we can take your live question. Okay, sir, we can hear you.
Sorry, I think there was no question from this side.
Oh, okay. All right. We like those kind of questions. All right. Mr. Ehrlich, are you ready to ask a live question?
Okay, well.
We can't hear you, Howard.
Yeah, Mr. Ehrlich, you're unmuted. You just need to get closer to the speaker or microphone, whichever one you're using. Or you can use the Q&A and we can answer it that way. I'm just giving a minute. So.
Technology is still a challenge.
Okay. I'm going to change to Janice Snook. So if she unmutes, then we'll be able to take her live question. So Ms. Snook, if you'll unmute, then we can take your question. Okay.
All right, there we go.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm the treasurer for the University Village chapter.
Yes.
And my question relates to the manner in which our 2020 dues refund appears in the operating budget for net chapter refunds. In other words, we have not as yet received a refund for 2020.
Okay. Lauren, I mean, that's an operational question. I know you've been in contact with a couple of people at University Village recently, given some of the transitions that they've had, both with ownership and leadership do you want to answer that question because it's specific to that particular chapter?
Yes, of course. Particular to this chapter, I think one thing that we might, and we can talk offline, is we might actually still need the membership list. I do know obviously we've received the check, but I think we were waiting on backup. And I am happy to reach out to you offline and we can talk about that.
We sent the membership list.
Okay, I definitely can go back and double check, but I think I did have that flagged as missing a list, but I can definitely go back and check, and you and I can work on that and make sure we have everything that we need.
Thank you. So how is that reflected in the operating budget for 2021?
Sure, I can answer that. I know there's been questions. If you look at the top of the budget under dues, there's a number, if you will, right after the dues line item that says net chapter refunds or net after chapter refunds. So
Yes, I see that.
So that's all of the projected chapter refunds across all chapters are that represented by that $23,000 number. Does that help answer that question?
Well, partly, except for the fact that we haven't received the 2020 refund.
No, we understand that. I mean, you will get it by the close of this year. We just sent out, generally speaking, we send out chapter refunds every month. But, again, those of you that do automated dues or a universal billing, sometimes we get the check first. And then I'll be honest with you, there are some communities where we don't get the list of what that check represented for 4 to 6 months. So for us to be able to, basically attribute that refund to a particular individual, we have to have the list to be able to do that. Not saying that was the case for University Village, but it does happen from some of the communities. But, generally speaking, as soon as we get the list, or if somebody is not in an automated dues chapter and they're paying as an individual, those refunds, effectively we cut pretty much every 30 to 45 days. So the only time there's really a lag time is if we're waiting on a big list, of who the check actually represented in terms of the actual members. But we'll definitely get it closed out for University Village by the close of this fiscal year. And then obviously based on your renewals next year, then you would get refunds for next year as well.
Thank you, Bennett.
Yes, ma'am. I know we have a, I'm going to go to Larry, it just changed to a number, but I don't have a name because they called in by phone. So this is, I'm just going to read a phone number out loud, but I'll just say area code 302, but I think it was under Larry at the beginning. So I'm going to see if he can unmute and then ask a question, and we'll go back to Mr. Ehrlich to see if we can get him live again. So if you've got a 302 area code, if you'll unmute yourself, you can ask a live question. Okay, we'll give you a minute to unmute. Okay, sir, you're recognized. I think that's just Larry. Or actually, there's a Larry already in the queue. So Larry, you can ask your question. Sorry, we just don't have your last name posted. Larry, you're recognized to ask your question.
Bennett, this may be Larry Liso, who was in touch with you earlier, who's on the phone as well, and
Okay.
his phone is not unmuted.
It shows unmuted on our end. Yeah, I do. All right. Well, I'm gonna try Mr. Ehrlich one more time. But Mr. Ehrlich, if you can't unmute, then we would encourage you to use the Q&A. Okay, Mr. Ehrlich, if you'll unmute. There we go. Yes, sir, we can hear you. We can hear you, sir.
I don't have any questions. I'm sorry.
Oh, all right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. There still is somebody with a 302 area code that's only on by phone. Actually, they didn't raise their hand, so that's okay. So let me check one more time. Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions on the budget. Just want to be safe. Just one more time to see if anybody posted a Q&A. Yeah, it is important. One of the delegates, it's appropriate to mention because some people called in by phone and some people called in by Zoom, and the two mutes are two different things. So depending on how you logged into this meeting, just be aware of what you need to do if you're trying to ask a live question. It's going to be dependent based on, how you called in to the meeting. So just be aware of that if you're trying to pose a question.
And if we proceed with the agenda, we can do that. And if anybody comes up with another question along the way, we'll be glad to address it. So,
yes. Let me bear with me because, okay. Indian River has a question. So I don't know who's actually going to pose the question. So I think whoever's in a position to.
Coming, give me a minute. Come. Just speak into the mic. Just speak.
So if someone from Indian River wants to ask their question, you're recognized.
Robert Bandrimmer, Indian River States East. The question was the $500 for MACRA. Is that for the state funding? Yeah. Because we also have a fund for the local. Is there a difference?
Yes, sir. We did answer that question. I don't know if you heard it before, but that is FLiCRA. FLiCRA's state board consistently has, and they renew it. Discuss it every year because we do NACRA updates pretty much at every board meeting at the state level. That is the state association dues FLiCRA pays to NACRA.
And I will add that each chapter can join NACRA individually as a chapter membership, and individuals can join NACRA as individuals with an individual membership to support the national continuing care retirement communities. So all of those feed into the national NACRA.
Okay. Are there any other? Let me see there. Okay, there is another Indian River question. Mr. Bandrimmer, are you going to pose that question or someone else?
I just wanted to let you know that Bob suggested that the individual club's fee was $200 to get into NACRA, and I think that's important enough to articulate.
Very good. Good comment. Okay. All right. Any other questions related to the FLiCRA budget for your treasurer? We're not trying to rush it, so we want to make sure anybody's got questions that you can do so. Okay, we've got two more participants that raised their hand. Let me see. Bear with me. Okay, let's see, bear with me. Okay, Carol Stevens, we can hear you. Do you want to pose your question?
Yes, my question concerns monthly mail-outs that we receive. Is it possible to receive those electronically and perhaps save paper and postage?
Lauren, do you want to address that? I know you do some of that with some communities.
Yes, we actually have 2 chapters now who have requested to receive those reports electronically. So I'm happy to set that up for you. There's only 2 items that we cannot send electronically, which are the invoices and obviously the membership cards if your chapter receives those. But I can send the reports electronically. I'm happy to do that.
All right, Mr. Ehrlich, I know you raised your hand. Is that from the previous, or do you have a follow-up? You have to unmute if there is a question. I don't see that. It looks like Eileen Nichols has a follow-up question. So if you'll unmute, you can pose your follow-up question.
Can you hear me? I just hit the unmute button.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Lauren just said something about membership cards. I thought FLiCRA did away with them.
We, I guess it was 2 years ago, if I remember correctly, somewhere in that ballpark, that we surveyed the chapters at that point in time and effectively gave discretion to the individual chapters to determine whether they want those cards or not. You know, in general, I mean, in general terms, you know, when people attend meetings, you know, at the local level, you already know that they're an active member because you're tracking that more closely. If they go to a regional meeting or a state meeting, they don't necessarily need their member card to attend. Again, because we generally, you know, we're tracking on the active roles, we know they're a member. So in many cases, people, you know, life members get 1 card if they want it, because then it's obviously a life membership. People who are renewing annually, some people still like to have cards, but other people said, hey, I'll just get my initial card and have that. So it's still a local discretion. Lauren, I mean, I think, what is it, less than 10 chapters do member cards now? It's not many.
No, it's more than that. I will say it was actually about 4 or 5 years ago when we did that with the chapters asking if they wanted them or not. I would say probably half still received them.
Is there a charge for the card?
No, ma'am, there's not. And if you'd like your chapter to start receiving them, I can obviously update that in our records.
I think I will discuss it with my board at the next meeting. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Snook, I think you have a follow-up question. And I guess what I would say is, you know, if I would ideally focus the questions on the budget, because we do have another open forum towards the end of the agenda for broader questions. So I would, if you do have questions right now, I would focus on the budget itself. But Ms. Snook, if you recognize.
Oh, okay. No, it was a follow-up question on the previous issue, the one that was being talked about.
Okay. Yeah, I would say operational questions. We do have another open forum, which will be a live Q&A. That's, I guess I would call it the kitchen sink open forum. But yes, yeah, so if anybody, I would say this is probably like your last request for any budget related questions, and then we would go ahead and move on to the next step for that part.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I'm not seeing any raised hands, and I'm not seeing any additional Q&A, Madam President, for your treasurer on the 2021 budget. So I think we could, you know, move on, because people, if they do have questions, know you've got to do the nominations report first, and then, you know, before any voting occurs, there'll be one more chance for some Q&A if there is any on the budget. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, so we'll stop with the budget for now. And Charlotte Cummings, would you please help us with the nominations committee? We have 2 open at-large seats to vote on today. So we'll ask Charlotte to share the information about that.
as Diane said, there are 2 seats. And what we're going to do is present to you our nominees for each of those seats. And we are then also, after that, going to ask if there are any nominations from the floor. And when that part of it comes up, we'll call on Bennett and the staff to handle any responses. The nominees are Chet James in Clearwater, Florida, and Tom Gregory, who is, I'm sorry, Tom, where are you?
St. Petersburg.
Thank you, I knew that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Chet because Chet's not with us today. Then I'll turn it over to Tom and he can tell you a little bit about himself. Chet is married. They live in Clearwater at Regency Oaks. He has been exceedingly active in his local FLiCRA chapter, in vice president and various other committee roles. He also has spent a lot of time, and I won't go into details here, very creatively thinking up things that the chapter has then negotiated with the management to do to promote the chapter and to expand its visibility. And some of them are quite novel. And he's fortunate to be in a CCRC where the management is open to talking about those sorts of things. Chet worked with IBM most of his career. I guess he would probably say the highlight of that was being at Cape Kennedy and on the launch team for Neil Armstrong. And so his life since then has been tied also to a lot of space activities around the space program. So with having said that, Tom, are you with us?
I am indeed.
Okay, there you are. I'd like you to meet Tom Gregory, our second candidate, and I will let him speak for himself.
Thank you, Charlotte. I just would like to say that I'm interested in serving FLiCRA. I think we all realize that the elderly population of Florida is going to grow exponentially over the next year and the coming years. Between the tax favorable status of Florida and our wonderful weather, we just can expect that we're going to have growth that we need to be ready to work with. And one of the things that I certainly learned on the Florida Commission on Ethics was the importance of having relationships with the folks who create the legislation that impact your area. I would like to just share an idea that came out of our chapter where we had a member make thank you awards for the Pinellas legislative delegation. And a group of us went to the delegation meeting and presented those awards personally to the members of the delegation. Something that hit me was it was the first time that some of our members had even met members of the Pinellas legislative delegation. And they were so impressed that they sent a representative to our next chapter meeting to thank us for thanking them. So as a board member, I would be interested in sharing successful ideas from our chapter and learning of other successful ideas from other chapters. One of the other not-for-profit organizations that I have been involved with for the past 20 years was the American Automobile Association, having served on the national board, the Auto Club group. And it was extremely beneficial because their efforts were focused on monitoring and speaking to the legislation that impacted the motoring public and making sure that the products and services that were provided to the members were cost beneficial. So I feel that my experience as a Florida insurance agent for health, life, and accident will be beneficial to the organization. But the major thing is that the major thrust of our organization never changes, that everything needs to be done based on whether it's a benefit for the individual members or not. Lastly, I would just say that FLiCRA's focus certainly has been impacted because of the COVID this year. All of us have experienced the limitations on the chapter activities. And one of our major important things that we have to accomplish is advertising FLiCRA and its benefits to the other residents and making sure that we continue to help them learn about the potential cost savings for independent living residents as a FLiCRA member. I would just share one idea from our chapter. I'm going to hold this up. It is a name tag with a FLiCRA lanyard that we created for every member of local chapter 44. And I would just say that the name tag itself is large enough so that it can be easily seen whether we maintain a 6-foot distance from each other or not. And since it's worn around the neck, it's a major way to easily advertise to other residents FLiCRA. And I would hope that each chapter might try that idea, and then once a month, just have a day when every member would wear that name tag. And especially then on the day that once we get back to chapter meetings. But in the meantime, we could be wearing those and just telling our fellow residents about the benefits of FLiCRA. Charlotte, I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for your words. And at this point, you now have heard about and from the 2 designated members. According to our bylaws, we are required to make sure that if there is a nomination from the floor, that is heard. And if there is a nomination from the floor, it will require the nominator to unmute a mic and make the nomination.
Thank you, Ms. Cummings. I'm monitoring the Q&A and also to see if anybody raises their hand. Just giving people a minute. There is a question. There is a, actually, I guess, well, effectively, Patrick Kluver, I would interpret this as a motion. There's a motion to accept the 2 proposed candidates because that's from a recognized delegate.
I second that motion.
Okay, so we've got a motion and a second to accept the committee's recommendations, or committee's recommendation. So is there, I guess, Mrs. Cummings, if you want to ask if there's any further discussion on that motion.
Yeah, we do want to make sure if you do have any questions about what we're doing to ask it now.
Just waiting to see if there's any follow-up questions or anybody raises their hand. Okay. I do not see any Madam Chair or Committee Chair. No questions or from the floor, and no one's raised their hand in follow-up.
Then I think
excuse me, David Rader, did you wave your hand for recognition?
No, he just seconded the motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry.
If that's the case, then I think we probably are ready to move to a vote.
Yes. So, Lauren, did you want to explain just on the electronic links how that relates to the budget and the ballot?
Yes. So this morning, the voting proxies for the chapter should have received a voting link. I have noted we've had quite a few people already submit their votes, so thank you. At this time, if you have not voted yet, you can go to that online ballot and
Go to your emails. That's what they'll do.
your votes.
Yes, and so I believe the information included the minutes, the state budget, as well as the two candidates that the committee has presented. So there's effectively a delegate ballot that covers all three action items. And again, that went out about 6 a.m. this morning to the delegates that had pre-registered. We know that there were a couple of changes this morning with delegates, which is not unusual on the day of the event. So we sent them the link as those came in. So everybody, if you checked your email, you will have that link. So
and just to note, just so there's no confusion, it went to the voting delegates, not everybody who registered. So only the voting delegates received it.
Right, understood. Okay, so Madam Chair, just as we would typically when those of the attendees that have been to the live conference, we obviously tabulate ballots and have tellers counting, but this one actually makes it easier because we've got a survey link and can do it that way. So we're actually, Madam Chair, about I think 5 minutes ahead of the break. So I don't know if we should probably still need to do a break just so we can tabulate. But let me, there is a question by Mickey Castor before we transition. So let me see if I can recognize her. Let me see if I can unmute her. Okay. Ms. Castor, you're recognized.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What I wanted to ask, I was very impressed by the ideas that these two new board members presented. And Charlotte talked about Chet Janes doing innovative negotiating with management. And since University Village is in, finally, we are in the implementation. We have new owners, we have money, we are renovating, and this is a prime time to do negotiations with management. And I would love to know what those specifics are, if they can be shared either via email or if it's appropriate to put it in the resident connection.
Mickey, I'm sure that is the case, that both men would be delighted to do that. And what I would like to do is have the leeway to, once they are finally elected on the board, to integrate the request for that kind of information in with everything else they're going to be dealing with as new board members. Would that be all right with you?
Certainly.
Okay, because I agree with you. They have a lot of information and ideas that should be shared, and how we do that and when needs to be discussed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions related to the delegate ballot before we transition back to your president?
Bennett, this is Ramsey.
Yes, sir.
I'm not quite sure how I'm going to vote because my screen is completely covered with the login for the session. If I leave it, I'm going to have to log back in to go out to.
Well, we're gonna. You can. Yeah, and I know this is kind of operational, but you can. Those of you that are in that position, you can do what's called exit full screen, and then that way you'd probably be able to pull back up your email at the bottom of your screen. But we are going to take a break, so that would allow people, if you have to do that, then you could log out and log back in. So we will have a long enough break for you to do that. I know there was a question from Lauren. There was a question from Louise Freeman at Sandhill Cove. I think they need that survey link. You probably have in your record list of who got the delegate ballot for Sandhill.
Thanks.
Of course, I can send it to Ms. Freeman right now.
Yes, Gary Hughes, I know, is probably one of our IT people. You can Alt-Tab with a PC. That'll allow you to cycle between two different, elements of what you're viewing. So you can open two things at once. So So again, using the viewing options will allow you to reduce what you're seeing, and then you can see the other things that you might want to do without having to log back out. That shouldn't be a problem. Okay. Any other questions related to the delegates before we turn it to your president? Just waiting to see, just to be safe. Madam President, I don't see any more raised hands, and I don't see any additional questions related to the motion at hand.
So given that, to give everybody time and to give Lauren time to organize the ballots, we'll take a 15-minute break. And my clock says it is now 10:17. So let's be back at 10:30, please.
All right, thank you. Lauren?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Will you send Sue Orth, if you have her email address, Village on the Green, resend that link?
Of course.
Okay, great, thank you.
Of course.
All right, so we'll take a short break and be back.
Hi, Ramsey.
Hi, Charlotte. How are you?
I'm dandy. How are you?
I'm good. I sent you an email. I got an update from Hank Keith. Our increase is going to be 3% or approximately 3% whenever they finish the budget, not 2%.
So if that's what's happening to you, that's what's happening over here too.
Exactly.
Yeah. No. See, there's been nothing said. Absolutely nothing.
Well, Hank came here like he normally does to meet with the Finance Committee in September, and he gave us all this update, which is really weird. The financials this year have been very unusual because we haven't gotten quarterly reports, and he gave us a report ending June 30th, which was kind of weird, but he gave us all the financials at that point, and we still haven't gotten anything else. And apparently there's some issue in how they report to OIR. So from that standpoint.
Well, all the CCRCs objected even before the law was passed to having to do quarterly reports. They didn't want to. And so maybe Westminster Communities is just proceeding to not do reports. I don't know.
Could be.
That would be in keeping with other aspects of the character of management in our communities.
I think you're right. They're not going to do anything you don't absolutely have to do.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to try to get some pictures for you, but not yesterday. It was dark and rainy, and today it's exactly the same. So.
Yeah, that's what we're at. We're in the midst of the final stages, I think, of the tropical storm. That's why I couldn't get on. My machine blanked out 3 times early this morning for some reason. But I think it's pretty much past now. It's just rainy now.
Well, I'm sure nobody over there wants to have to evacuate over here, you know. Which is what I'm glad we have a place for people to come, but it's never fun, I'm sure, for the.
No, and it's interesting because prior to this year, our executive director was really on top of any possible need to evacuate or shelter in place. And our new executive director hasn't quite caught on yet that he needs to tell us what's going on.
Charlotte and even Ramsey, on my screen, I exited full screen and I still have a thing that says take a break and FLiCRA. Yeah. Do you have that on your screen?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure I didn't do anything because I mean, they were.
You and I, all board members, have the capacity to unmute ourselves so we can visit with each other.
Right, and I understood that. That's why I unmuted mine just now, just to ask you that question. But I wasn't sure if I was, because I was thinking I should have the whole screen of everybody, but like we did yesterday.
No.
Yeah, that's it.
And I am assuming that all 76 people registered for this are not also listening to our conversation. So
they are. They can hear everything.
Okay,
they are.
well,
yeah,
we aren't doing any board business here. So
yeah,
we're a very transparent board.
Yes,
so.
everything's live. So
okay.
But no, so I know we've got a number of people that are like in small groups, socially distanced, and some are in auditoriums. So we've got 145 registrants, but we also know in some of the places they're distanced in auditoriums, so we're probably closer to 180, 190.
Yeah,
that's wonderful. It only says the number 76.
Right. But that's because only 76 people logged in on the Zoom link. But if they're in a group, that there's only one sign in, but they might have 5 to 15 people in a distanced room, but they just used one login.
Yeah, that's what at Indian River Estates we combined East and West, and we're using our multi-purpose room in West, and we've invited all the board members. Plus, and which gave some room for a few other people if they wanted to come and we had a sign-up sheet, and we did have, I don't know how many are there now, but yeah, so it worked out really well. I hope I'll have to talk with our president, Chuck Schneider, and see how it worked for them, but that was their intent.
That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Hugh, it's nice to see you today.
Thank you. At this age, it's nice to be seen.
I may be needing to call on you for some tips, pointers.
Oh, I'd be delighted to help you, particularly you, Charlotte, since you are picking up my old job.
Yeah.
I've got 3 shelves full of binders, one for every meeting we've ever held, going back to 2012.
I think you should keep those as souvenirs.
I hope they become the Dead Sea Scrolls for a later generation.
Yes, yes.
They could be part of your library as you create your library when you go out of office.
Okay, I've got a separate one of Civil War books, or since we're a Southern audience, the War Between the States.
Oh.
Well, unfortunately, we can't provide you Secret Service coverage, but we will let you start a library.
My friends in Georgia call it the War of Northern Aggression.
You know, Hugh, when Milton and I visited, we're up in Virginia, and we did a little tour, and the docent referred to the Civil War as that unpleasantness with the North. Which and it was since you went 8 years.
Sorry, my friends, but it is time to get back to work. And I know that we all miss the breakfast, the lunches, the time to socialize. And it's unfortunate that we can't do that this year, because that has really been a feature of our meetings, our get-togethers. In addition to which, a guest speaker was not even practical for this year. So we don't have that to share. But we're accomplishing a lot, and I hope that everybody who's watching is appreciating that this is a valuable experience, and that we're glad to be together even if we can't see everybody and share it in person. So with that, I'm going to ask whether we have our tally. Lauren, do we have a result to our elections and voting?
I think she's still tallying, because we had to resend a couple of links. So it probably is appropriate, if you don't mind, Madam President, we just start with the regional reports.
Okay.
And then that gives plenty of time for the final tally of the survey. She's got to pull the survey results for all 3 action items and then tally it from there.
Okay, excellent. Very good idea. So with that, may we have your regional report, Charlotte? Oh, unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself.
You're still muted, Charlotte.
There, sorry about that.
Very good. Very good.
I am director of Region 1. And for those of you out there who don't know this, Region 1 has the distinction of being the smallest region of the 8. There are only 2 CCRCs in our region, both very, very active chapters, one in Pensacola and the other one here in Tallahassee. And we often are called on to work with the staff on legislative issues that require our presence at the Capitol. We also did the call to action that everybody else did. But I think the thing I want to highlight is that both chapters, and this was coincidental, but both chapters this year, we're going through a great deal of introspection and reorganizing. And that was good. It was good timing in both cases, because having monthly meetings really just didn't work out very well. And so I've monitored the reorganization and the introspection process in both chapters. And I think both chapters are going to come out much stronger as a result. And that's good news. So that is my report. Oh, and coincidentally, because I have such a small region, I am delighted to tell you that I often get asked to do a whole lot of other jobs for the FLiCRA board because I have more time. Madam
You do them very well, Charlotte. Thank you. Thank you very much. Region 2, Ramsey Geyer, please.
Yes, I'm Ramsey Geyer, Director of Region 2, and I apologize early on. We had some issues here with a storm and my machine didn't want to operate, but we're back online now. Region 2 has 6 chapters, relatively close together, so my travel is less than some of my counterparts. I did want to make an initial statement that as a result of COVID, the emphasis of support from most of the CCRCs has been on this skilled nursing and assisted living residents, more so than independent residents. The industry at this point is facing a challenge in that as more and more people are looking to move into CCRCs, the emphasis on independent living needs to be improved. The focus has been on aging in place, being able to stay in your home, not having to move into assisted living or the SNF. The problem is there are no programs provided by the owner operators. Now there are programs provided by other agencies, but the link to that, the ability to have a smooth transition, a case manager and or a person to assist the independent living residents doesn't exist. So that's an issue that's being brought forth on a nationwide basis, not just locally, but it's important to recognize that the majority of the new residents moving into a CCRC are the independent living residents, and they need to have assurances of what their coverage is going to be. Secondly, moving from the independent living to the assisted living or the skilled nursing is complicated now because in order to keep the lights on, they need to keep the beds filled. Therefore, they will continue to solicit non-CCRC residents to fill those beds, which at times may make it difficult for the independent living residents to get in. And these are issues that, again, the industry is going to be focused on. They are issues that we're focusing on locally to try to get a head start. But I did want to highlight 2 chapters that I think have done an excellent job of working inside the constraints of the COVID restrictions. My home chapter here in Westminster, Julington Creek, elected a new president and also elected a new membership. Actually, it's a subset. It's a action committee for the membership to go out and actively recruit new members. And even under the COVID restrictions, they were able to enlist, at this point, better than 35 new members since March with the various cautionary positions they took with meetings and whatnot. So they need to be congratulated on their membership improvement. Cypress Village, I should highlight as the leader in the involvement of technology. They have involved their IT resources to move virtual technology as fast as they can. They're working with IN2L, they're working with Inspire to address ways to address the isolation that's been created by the COVID. I was watching a seminar the other day on the impact of COVID, and the doctor that was presenting that made 3 different issues. The first one was obviously the COVID issue. The second one was isolation issues, which have ramifications need to be considered. And the third was the relocation, the reorganization as a result of all those changes. And these are the things that we're all faced with, and I think each community is trying its best to minimize that impact on all their residents. So I thank all the chapters for their work in that regard. And that's my report.
Thank you, Ramsey, very much. Very complete. Region 3, Richard Greatwood.
Yes, good morning. We have in Region 3, 3 chapters of Mayflower and Winter Park, of which I'm a resident, Village on the Green, and John Knox Village in Orange City. I have no report from John Knox Village, unfortunately. Village on the Green, however, reports happily that they used Zoom to inform residents of the increase of their monthly fees. And the residents feel that they were informed and were able to ask questions, which was greatly appreciated by them all. They are also proceeding with quite a large expansion, as we are at the Mayflower, and they have reported that their facility has completed the health center and is ready to receive residents in 2021, and 18 additional independent living villas have been finished and are ready. At the Mayflower, we also are proceeding slowly with a major expansion. Two of our committees have been extremely busy. We have happily a finance committee that we started about 3 years ago that has produced really several residents who are very astute at the financial makings of a CCRC. And we're very delighted that we are a resource. Now, as far as disclosure requirements for the continuing care maintenance fees, we had a very unhappy try at it by our provider, who decided to do things backwards a little bit. All the decisions were made, and then the residents were notified that they may ask any questions of the CEO or the CFO. However, that was an impossibility because no resident had any thing in hand to see what the new budget was going to look like, what the maintenance fees were going to be changed to, which incidentally we received a 4% increase. So anyway, it seemed to me that if Zoom is to be used more, not necessarily for pandemic, we hope that will be solved in the coming year, but if it happens to be a way in which CCOs decide that this is a good way to approach the residents, hopefully with a growing competency of enough residents who are computer savvy to be able to join in, might be the only time that we're going to use it. But if it's something that CCRCs want to gradually move to, then I'm really hoping that the process needs to be studied so that we have more influence as residents, as these budgets are being performed and as fees are being calculated. So that is my report, hoping for the best.
Thank you very much. Laura. Thank you very much. Region 4, Pat Birdsall.
Yes, good morning. I'm Pat Birdsall. I'm director for Region 4. And before the election of Tom Gregory and Chet James, I'm the newest member on the board, a newbie. I'm filling the open seat of Bob Forbush. There are 7 properties in Region 4, and of the 7, there are some that are operating with only 1 or 2 people on the board, or just a few residents on the board. They're keeping up with membership despite the restrictions due to the pandemic. And a couple of the properties are still, or even maybe at this moment, starting to receive new residents. Indian River States East and West is now meeting in person, and has been actually for the last several months. And they also have coordinated, the 2 presidents have coordinated some coordinating on certain projects, which I think is a good thing. Prior to that, we were totally separate, but we were on the same campus. So we're making an effort to do more things together as a team. Also, I wanted to mention that Indian River Estates is building some new villas, large ones, and I don't know when they'll be finished, but it will provide an opportunity for new members. So I'm happy to report that. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat, and welcome to the board again. And we look forward to working with you on an ongoing basis. Thank you very much. Region 5, John Dowsler.
Region 5 has 10 CCRCs, and Hugh Strong and Al Perlman have been very helpful for my 3 years as region director. Again, all 10 of my CCRCs have done well in Region 5, and just St. Andrews North reported to the board that FLiCRA membership remains strong, and St. Andrews South is opening up, but still prohibiting gatherings. Abby Del Rey is reporting that our executive director and team members have done an excellent job of maintaining a safe and near normal as possible, doing the long-term close down of the community and the health center. And in collaboration with Harbor's Edge and Abby Del Rey, the 3 FLiCRA chapters will retain statements. They meet together, and they have the same candidates for the Florida House of Representatives, so that's good cooperation. And at East Ridge Village, they've been very successful during the pandemic, and Harbor's Edge reports that management and staff has done a marvelous job of keeping residents COVID-19 free. And at John Knox Village, Pompano Beach, all residents are saying yes to an active, informed lifestyle as a commitment that brings happiness to residents every day. And the FLiCRA board has the FLiCRA board at John Knox Village has met with Zoom meetings, as I think many of the other boards are. And Edgewater Point just has a total of 343 members. And this is my last report because David Baer is taking over for Region 5 director, and I am asking all the CCRCs in Region 5 cooperate with David, but he will provide a great source of information to the CCRCs in Region 5, and he will do a very, very good job. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and I think we all owe John a vote of thanks. John has been involved with FLiCRA for
since
13 years, since 2006, 14 years. He has been region director, he has been president, he has been a very active member and leadership, and we owe him a lot of gratitude. So thank you very much, John. And I'm not saying that because he's sitting here. Region 6, Sally Jane.
She is having, Madam President, she's having trouble calling back in. So if you'll move to Mr. Neff.
Okay, and we'll just welcome Sally whenever she can get back in. Ray, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with the story as to how we can learn something every day. And this couple had a pretty good marriage, but they thought that they would go to a marriage counselor. And while at the marriage counselor came in and said to the gentleman, said, you know, I just had a nice discussion with your wife. He said, your wife tells me that you never bought her flowers. And he said, well, to tell you the truth, I didn't even know until right now that she ever even sold flowers. To look into the numbers a little further that you've heard, Region 7 has 13 chapters and one CCRC that does not have a chapter that now has 69 members. If you look at the strategic plan for FLiCRA, there is absolutely no prerequisite that you need to have a chapter to have members. So I challenge everybody to keep that thought in mind. When our good treasurer told us that the average decrease for us in total was about 0.7%. To look at those numbers a little further, in our region among the 13, we had 4 chapters that had an increase in their numbers, 1 that stayed the same, and 9 that decreased. Now, the decrease in one chapter was as much as 10%, and the largest increase was 6%. So let's keep in mind, and the great question from University Village, there's a lot of innovative things that can be done to stimulate things, and let's keep a very, very open mind as to what we can do, because everybody now knows what the budget is for next year, and everybody can have a favorable impact on the revenue side of the budget. That ends my report.
But it doesn't end the thanks, Ray. And a lot of the growth in your region has come from your efforts in trying to get chapters. And membership, I think, is part of a result of the work you've been doing out there. And chapter or no chapter, thank you very much. And we need to keep paying attention to how we can grow the organization. Thank you. Region 8, David Rader. And somebody check your mic. We're hearing background sound, so if there are voices in your environment, just turn off your mic temporarily. Thank you. David. Oh, David, you have to unmic yourself. Unmute yourself. Yeah.
I'm David Rader with District 8. I have very little to add to what the others have said. We have 3 CCRCs in our district, and they are working very hard under these limiting circumstances. I think things, all in all, have gone very well here in North Central Florida, and we look forward to doing so again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, David, very much. Sally, are you back with us?
I think I am.
Yes, please. Sally from Region 6. Yes, please unmute yourself. Yeah.
I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, you are now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Region 6, like everybody else, is dealing with distancing, which is physical but not social. Cypress Cove has done a great job of using Zoom and their in-house facilities to keep members involved. The rest of us are coping because we don't have that ability. Membership is stable. We're still committed, and we're doing the best we can as we can.
Thank you, and may you have the health and the strength to continue. Thank you very much. So any questions for our regional directors, for each other, about these reports?
Madam Chair, I'm just monitoring the question and answer and see if anybody raised their hand for any questions directly to regional directors. So just give me a second here and see if there's any. I don't see any. Well, actually, I have a raised hand from Mickey Castor, so give me a minute. Okay, Ms. Castor, you're recognized.
Hey, this is just an example of my ignorance on this wonderful, I love having this map with where all of the CCRCs are. I do not understand the designations, about 3 of them in parens of PCOA. What is that?
Sure. PCOA, government being government, there's always an acronym for everything.
Of course.
And so PCOA stands for Provisional Certificate of Authority. So when a community is in development, if you will, they're given what's called a provisional certificate as opposed to a certificate, which is for those that are operational, if you will.
And some people may not understand, Jenny, that there are occasionally CCRCs that go out of the CCRC business. They stop being long-term care facilities. They stop being continuing care facilities. And so there are fluctuations sometimes in the numbers of actual CCRCs functioning within the state, much less in the country. So those maps may vary on the.
That is correct. Yes, I know Mrs. Castro asked that question offline too. So just for the broader group. So your president's referring to a status of what's called runoff, and runoff means that they meaning the community has submitted to the Office of Insurance Regulation that they're no longer going to continue to sell CCRC or life plan contracts, but as long as they have existing contract residents, they have to comply with Chapter 651, the Florida Statute 651. Even if they're down to 1 contract resident, they have to maintain the compliance. But runoff is not new. Runoff has been a process that's been available to providers for quite a while. Depending on the demographics of the community, in some cases I've seen it take 15 or 20 years for them to go through the whole runoff process. So it's not like it happens, it doesn't usually happen very quickly. I know some of you posted some questions, I'll just address them. We do have an open forum, which I'm going to get into open forum not too long from now, but there's a question, we can put a region number on the facility location map. We do have a Word document that we can circulate that shows the regions by county, but we can definitely try to do it by the map. But as you can see, based on how the CCRCs are geographically located, it's going to look like one of those hurricane models of color coding. But we do have a Word document that shows you regions by county that we definitely can share with leaders. Question is, what is the current number of CCRCs in Florida and how many have chapters? Effectively we're at 71 continuing care communities. We may get a different number from the Office of Insurance Regulation next week, which we'll talk about that meeting during the open forum. And as far as chapters, I think we're still hovering what I call official chapters, meaning they've got bylaws, they've got a board. I think we're still at around 54 out of the 71.
Yeah, this is a copy of the map that was distributed. I don't know if everybody saw that.
Yes, they have the map in their packet. They have their map in the packet, but it's a black and white copy. I don't see any other questions specifically to the regional directors, Madam President.
If Lauren's not ready yet, Bennett, do you want to go on and discuss the legislative session update?
I could definitely do that. Yeah, I'm in contact with Lauren. Just because you have to attribute the delegate counts to the votes, so she's still working through that. So actually, she just I've got it. She just has it. So based on the chapters represented today, we had a total of there's 30 chapters that submitted ballots. I think we have more than that in attendance, but 30 submitted ballots. So that represents a total of effectively 104 delegate votes, if you will. So we have, Madam President, just as it relates to the three action items, the 2019 minutes were approved, 104 votes, no votes against. 2021 budget, 104 votes in favor of the budget, no votes against. And then we had 103 votes for Tom Gregory and 104 votes for Chet Jane. So both candidates have been effectively elected. And so we welcome them in that context. So
congratulations. Welcome, Tom. And we will certainly be in touch with Chad and keep him up to date on what's happening here.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. The next report will be then on the officers for this organization going forward in 2020. Bennett, would you please read those? Share
yes, ma'am.
those?
Yes. Effectively, the board, generally speaking, when we have in-person meetings, adjourns into a hallway to elect its own officers because the bylaws allow the board to elect its own officers. There's a virtual hallway, but not a real hallway. But contingent upon today's vote, the board had discussion relative to the 2020-2021 officers. So the board members serve multi-year terms, meaning there's 12 board members, and they're elected to 3-year terms, but officers are 1 year. So in the sense of, somebody serving in a particular officer role, that's 1 year unless they are reelected by their peers, but if they're still eligible on the board itself. So we're happy to announce the results of the officer decisions. Couple of changes because we have, I think it's appropriate at this stage to recognize Hugh Strawn and John Dulcimer are coming off the board. So we have 2 individuals coming off the board after multiple terms in office. And as John mentioned, he's been on the board more than once and also, has been FLiCRA state president. So he's been not only the president, but he's been the first man. Everything in between. So they've both done a great job. So we're sorry to see them go, but they are coming off the board, and we will appropriately recognize them with a token of appreciation. We can't do that again live, but that will be forthcoming for both of them. So as it relates to the officers, your officers for the next year are president is Diane Dulcimer. She will be president 1 more year. That will be her last year. Just giving people a foreshadowing because she is term limited off the board fall of next year. Jim Jandro will continue as your treasurer. Jim also is term limited off the board in the fall of 2021, but he will remain treasurer. We have vice president will be Ramsey Geyer, and then secretary will be Charlotte Cummings. And under the bylaws, the board has a provision to have a 5th member of the executive committee so you've got 12 board members, so a 5-member executive committee. So you would have an odd number of directors there. Pleased to announce that Tom Gregory will fulfill the 5th member of the executive committee, and that is your officer lineup. We will obviously update the website so people know, who the new board is. The one thing I would stress, because there has been a change in the officer role, is that Ramsey Geyer, it's just worth mentioning, was reelected this summer to the Region 2 director post by the chapters in his region. With John's transition, actually Dave Baer is transitioning from an at-large position which he's served in the last couple years, and will, effective after this meeting, will take office as the Region 5 director on the board. So he stays on the board, but just changing hats. So that's real excited about the leadership and what we've got in store for next year. So, Madam President, I can do an installation, or if you'd like me to do the installation kind of at the end, we can switch the agenda. We're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, so I'm happy to do whatever your feel is appropriate.
But let's do the installation now, Bennett, so we know that's taken care of, and then
Perfect.
we can complete the agenda and then have an open conversation until we're done.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'll give us plenty of time for open Q&A and the legislative reports. All right. So I know Mr. James cannot be with us, and we wish him well this week on his recovery. But I know he was looking forward to serving on the board. So Tom Gregory is with us this morning. And so those of you that are continuing on the board or newly elected to the board, going to administer an oath of office for each of you. And at the appropriate time, you'll raise your right hands. So, and again, if you'll unmute yourselves, that would be helpful, just so we can hear you acknowledge. So you stand on the threshold of a new year for the Board of Directors of the Florida Life Care Residents Association. You've been elected by your fellow members to help guide the organization to new levels of service. This vote of confidence in your ability and dedication is also a vote of thanks. Gratitude for your willingness to commit your time and energy for the betterment of all FLiCRA members. Just as you will be generous with your time, so too will the members who have elected you. Through their participation, they will give you the support you need to be effective. With the prestige of office also comes the responsibility to represent the interest of the membership. And in providing leadership, you offer yourself as a servant for your fellow residents. If you're prepared for these duties, please raise your right hand. Mr. Rader, call him out. All right. Do you sincerely promise that you will administer your office on the board of directors to the best of your ability and judgment? Answer in the affirmative.
I do.
I will.
That you will act in conformity with the FLiCRA state bylaws.
I
will.
Will.
That your decisions and actions will be governed by the principles of honesty and justice.
I will.
It's a great privilege and honor to be able to recognize each of you and thank you for your service on the board. And we can confirm you are all newly elected for the 2020-2021 term, and thank you for your continued and new service for Mr. Gregory and Mr. James. So thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Bennett, very much.
Thank you. And again, thank you to Hugh and John for their diligent service over the years. Been wonderful leaders for the organization, both locally and at the state level. All right. Okay.
So legislative information?
Yes. All right. I'm going to start with legislative topics first, and then again, we will have time for some what I call, kitchen sink. If we don't cover something, we're actually ahead of schedule, and so we will definitely have plenty of time for Q&A. So don't feel like you have to rush, because we have plenty of time. So let me talk about state related topics first. There's a couple of federal ones that people have asked us to cover, and we'll do so. And I know that will spur other questions, so we'll just try to monitor the chat and do follow-ups as they may come. So we got some pre-submitted questions before the meeting. So let me talk about state of Florida first, and we'll tell you what we know, and we'll tell you what we don't know. So I think as a backdrop to Florida, I think there's some interesting data to start with, and that will kind of lead to the discussions about what actually the legislature might tackle in 2021. We shared with your board previously that, you know, how FLiCRA conducts its work in the next legislative session, meaning in the spring, will probably, at least for part of the session or all of the session, will look vastly different. COVID is clearly the reason for that. And what I mean by that is, at this stage, the legislature is, will be in Tallahassee in 2 weeks, actually next week, to get installed after the fall elections. And just to give you an indication of what things are going to look like at this stage, the Capitol has been closed to the public pretty much since March. I can share with you, just from a Tallahassee standpoint, not only the Capitol, but in some cases, a number of the state agencies, meaning the state employees, are still working remote. Some agencies are doing hybrid. They have some staff in the office and some still remote, but there's some state agencies that are still 100% remote work. The Capitol is following quite a bit of that protocol as well, and it looks like they'll continue to do that. So just as an example, the Senate has put out protocols for next week that only newly elected senators can bring family or guest to come in to see them sworn into office. If they're an incumbent that was reelected, they effectively have to, cannot bring friends and family, just to reduce the number of people. They can't bring district legislative staff with them, those types of things. We have an expectation that, when they have committee meetings in January, they actually won't have any committee meetings in December, which they typically do have some in December. But they're just, again, waiting for, kind of some of the trends to improve. There's an expectation, like I said, at least for January, February, if not March and April too, that as it relates to advocacy, when the legislature holds House and Senate committee meetings, a lot of them may be virtual, in the standpoint that the committees themselves may be meeting in person distance, but people who come to provide public testimony, which includes associations like us on particular pieces of legislation, that may be where only, certain number of people can provide public testimony in person, and then the rest would do it by video. So that's, we'll see how things progress, and that's all going to be based on the trends in terms of what happens with Florida's, infection rates and things of that nature over the next 90 to 120 days. There have not been very many bills filed for the 2001 legislative session yet, which is not unusual since we just got out of, came out of an election. I can give you a precursor of at least some key things that, will be on the table. I think it's important to kind of look at Florida in terms of revenue drops. And, Florida historically has had, consistently increased revenue as opposed to declining revenue. But given we don't have an income tax and everything's primarily focused on sales tax and tourist taxes and those types of things, clearly we've had a hit. So if we look 2020, 2021, 2022 for Florida, this year, the number will probably will change by the end of the year, but let's just say about $2 billion in reduced revenue from off of pre-COVID projections. Next year will be even more, based on what we know right now, $3.5 billion reduction in revenue, and then 2022. So the tail, meaning the impact of COVID on revenue streams for states, is not a short one. So even going into 2022, it's projected that we'll have a $2 billion reduction in revenue, from based on pre-COVID predictions, which, in total, that's 22% decline over 3 years. Now, what I would share with you, if we're looking for any silver lining, I know many of you came from different states, but you know, California, just to give you a perspective, California over the next 2 years, not 3 years, 2020 and 2021, is projected to be down over $42 billion in revenue. If we look at, you know, some places where our members came from, in some respects, just to pick a couple of examples, New Jersey is probably about close to $9 billion in 2 years, not 3 years. And then New York, we obviously have quite a few members that, you know, came from New York, depending on where they live in the state, just to give you perspective on that. So New York, again, just for 21 and 2022, will be about $40 billion reduced in revenue. So, you know, Florida's not chump change, but it could be a lot worse. Clearly could be a lot worse. But with that said, I mean, because we only have revenue that comes from certain places, and tourism is a big piece of that, you know, that's going to continue work. You know, it could get worse. I mean, these are predictions. So it really depends on how quickly tourism can come back, as it relates to distancing and protocols and large gatherings, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the backdrop that the legislature is going to have to work from. On one of the key things to be cognizant of, which we've covered this summer in the resident connection, is you know, lawsuit liability, if you will. And so the House and Senate both will have specific committees focused on, you know, the House has one actually called the Pandemic and Public Emergencies Committee, which that committee, quote unquote, never existed before. We've had hurricane recovery task forces, those kind of things, but so this is a new one. So, but a piece of that committee, and there's a separate one, there's a pandemic committee in the Senate as well, will, part of what they're going to address, which is what the business community is seeking, is, you know, effectively, you know, immunity from COVID related claims. So that broad topic is going to be, I mean, assumption with that and maybe water quality will be the top two prevailing topics for, you know, aside from the budget, policy areas to look at. Now, what that means to us is our membership, it's clearly going to relate to assisted living and skilled nursing, including those components that are in a continuing care retirement community campus. So, you know, we'll be clearly monitoring and actively involved as it relates to discussions on, you know, immunity and, you know, is that blanket immunity? Is the immunity based on certain, you know, criteria? And as you would imagine, the insurance marketplace is going to be heavily involved in that for obvious reasons. You know, I guess I would say, I hate to call it a free-for-all, but that's probably what we're looking to. There's going to be some huge, you know, lobbying, if you will, on every side of this topic. And at some point, there will be some public policy solution that's put on the table. We just have to determine if we're on the right side of that solution or not, or somewhere in the middle. It's going to be. I mean, you can look back in time about certain moments in time in Florida's history over the last 30 years. That this is going to be an all-out, you know, turf battle, if you will, to achieve, you know, certain objectives depending on, you know, what special interest group is asking for what, and it's going to be very interesting to watch how this plays out. So you know, going back to what your president talked about earlier, you know, anything you can do at the local level to maintain communication with your state legislators is extremely important. And especially as this progresses, we'll keep you in abreast of, are these things being proposed positive, negative, or neutral? And be frank with you, they're probably going to move fairly quickly because all of them relate to how quickly the state of Florida itself will recover from a state budget standpoint, but also the business community. It's going to be very interesting to watch, to say the least. As it relates to continuing care retirement communities, what we would share with you is the Governor's Continuing Care Advisory Council has a meeting, a public meeting next week. It's virtual, just like this one. They have not met in a year. They were supposed to meet in September and it got moved back, so they're meeting next November 18th. We have 3 members actually of this state board that are on that council, and Ramsey Geyer is the chair of the council. And they'll have an election just like FLiCRA had an election, so fingers crossed that Ramsey gets reelected as chair. Hope that would be the case. That would be nice to see that. But that meeting with the Office of Insurance Regulation, we'll hear directly from them if they're, as the regulators are going to submit any changes to Florida Statute 651. We haven't heard that they are, but you never know what they might do. Leading Age Florida, based on what we know, we expect that Leading Age Florida will file either a standalone bill or an amendment to another bill related to Chapter 651 that relates to lenders, people who finance the continuing care retirement communities through bonds and things of that nature. FLiCRA reviewed this language actually starting back in the fall of 2019. Leading Age actually tried to file an amendment to a couple of bills in the 2020 session last spring, but it didn't go through. So FLiCRA's reviewed that language. It's I would call it very surgical focused. It's 2 or 3 line change. It doesn't impact negatively, if you will, any components of the overall 2019 law that went into effect. But we don't expect anything from Leading Age, at least on the continuing care statute, beyond that. FLiCRA at this stage, is not proposing any 651 legislation. Your board, has continued to meet telephonically over the last 6 months. We kind of want to let the dust settle, if you will, on the new law that got passed and see how it continues to work. And there really hasn't been enough time to really measure that. We're just now going through, new annual reporting and tracking by the regulators on some of the new provisions. And this is a correlated question on disclosure, because there have been some questions because some of the provisions of the new law took effect January 1st, 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago, but it was still this year. But I'm going to send this document out to the chapters. So Eric Thorne, who's our inside general counsel, he's updated a couple of documents. So we have an 11-page kind of layman's terms documents on 651 that Eric's updated, and we're going to circulate that. And then we also, many of you at the local level have used the budget and finance handbook with either your resident councils, or if you've got a resident budget and finance committee. That's been updated, integrating the 2020 components. And so we'll make sure that you're aware of kind of some updated editorial content in that. But I think it's important for me to, especially because most of you have either gotten your notices of maintenance fee increases already, or if you haven't already, you're probably in the next few weeks you will do so. Under the current law, as it relates to disclosure, and I'll do this kind of like, I won't read word for word, but I'll give you the key components. So these are the disclosure elements that are in the current law. And some of these relate back to your resident council. So just make you aware, of what those provisions are. So some things that some of which have been here, in the law before, but just to remind you what they are. So they have to, the provider conspicuously has to post its certificate of authority, usually which is in the common area near the main dining room or something like that on a bulletin board. They also have to now post a concise summary of the last, what's called examination report by the Office of Insurance Regulation. And also, if they don't post it right there, provide to the residents where the full report may be inspected, whether that may be in the CFO's office or in the library, those kind of things. A new provision, which some of our membership has already used, is the provider has to post a notice containing the Division of Consumer Services website and a toll-free consumer helpline, as well as the Office of Insurance Regulations website and telephone number, when and if a resident or a group of residents want to submit inquiries or complaints as it relates to a provider's potential violations of the Florida Statute 651. As it relates to resident councils, the management has to provide a notice to the president or chair of a resident council of when a final examination report occurs or any legal or administrative proceeding that's occurring with the Office of Insurance Regulation is occurring. They have to do that and provide that notification within 10 business days of that regulatory action by the regulators. They have to provide a summary of the last annual statement, and then also post a listing of any proposed changes in policies, programs, or services that the provider is seeking to change to the resident agreement. Going back to the resident council, they have to provide the resident council the full annual statement, as well as any recent third-party financial audits within 30 days of when those are filed with the Office of Insurance Regulation. They have to, as they have done in the past, deliver information related to increases in monthly maintenance fees and the reasons for any increase that exceeds the consumer price index to the president or the chair of the resident council. Clearly, they'll do that to the broader residents as well, generally through a town hall. But this summer, the regulators have allowed virtual meetings or virtual communication. Resident councils also have to be provided a summary of entrance fees collected and refunds made during the time period covered in the annual report that the provider submits to the Office of Insurance Regulation, and any refund balances that are adjacent to that time period. If certain providers have to file quarterly financials with the Office of Insurance Regulation. If that is the case, again, the provider has to provide that to the resident council chair within 30 days of when they file it with the state. Upon request, this is just emphasizing those words, upon request, any newly approved continuing care or continuing care at home contracts that the provider is offering to new residents have to be provided to the council within 30 days of when the Office of Insurance Regulation has actually approved them to be marketed, but the council has to ask for those. If there is to be a change in ownership of the community, then that has to be delivered to the president or chair of the resident council as well, within 10 business days of when they file that notification with the Office of Insurance Regulation. If the provider has plans for any expansion or phased development that's been approved by the provider's governing board, then again, within 3 business days of when that occurs, they have to provide that to the president or chair of the resident council. Also, the last thing on disclosure is when and if a provider is obtaining new financing or additional financing or refinancing relative to the community, then they have to notify the council of that at least 30 days before the closing date of that transaction taking place. So there, as you can see, there's a whole additional slew of disclosure that is now there with the new law that you need to be aware of, especially if those of you that are on the resident council or your friends are on that resident council. Make sure that they're aware of what's required, and that there's a lot of stuff covered in that disclosure. Let's see. In terms of other state activities, like I said, I mean, right now, as of today, there's really probably about 25 bills or less that have been filed in the House and Senate at the state level. So we don't know, what the final number will be. I mean, my expectation is we will have less bills filed this year than we did last year, because my assumption is the House and Senate leadership are going to say, unless it's extremely urgent, don't, not say all bills aren't important, but some are more important than others. They're gonna, especially with anticipation of virtual committee meetings and public testimony and how that's going to be different. I think they're going to try to recommend legislators only file the bills that are absolutely necessary. Just because just to get in a normal year when you can have open public testimony, when you have a couple of thousand bills that have been filed, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to get a lot of bills through the committee process, in a democratic way, where you still want to allow public testimony and input. It will be harder if part of that is done virtually for a portion or all of the session. It's just going to be different. So we'll keep you abreast of any changes there. There was a question on federal issues from one of the chapters, I think Bay Village, relative to leading age at the national level and NACRA, National Continuing Care Residents Association, on telehealth reimbursements. The issue related to telehealth is, at the federal level, clearly a lot of you, including me, have used telehealth for, general, what you would call your primary care physician appointments over the last 6 or 7 months in some cases. The telehealth issue at the federal level relates to home health, because primary is effectively covered depending on what type of health care plan you have or Medicare supplemental plan that you might have. But telehealth, as it relates to home health, in that definition, is effectively generally out of pocket. And so recently, on the Senate side and the House side, there was a bill that was filed called the Home Health Emergency Access to Telehealth Act, that would provide Medicare reimbursement for audio and video telehealth services that are furnished by home health agencies during a pandemic type scenario. And so, obviously, we all know we're going to have to wait till January. Probably, I don't expect, anything will happen in the next, before the close of the year, because we don't know, how the Senate is going to look in terms of some runoff elections that are going to occur in the U.S. Senate. And then the House, obviously, there were changes in the House. So that bill was filed prior to the election. So I would expect there's not a whole lot of grassroots advocacy that probably should occur before January. But once, we get to the end of January, then I expect that issue will come back front and center. And if appropriate, FLiCRA's members will likely want to be involved in that in terms of a call to action as things progress. So I wouldn't recommend too much advocacy right now, because it's probably going to get lost in the shuffle based on what we know is happening in DC right now. So, but it will likely be something we look at in the first quarter. that is it, Madam President, on legislative topics. I'm going to segment the two topics. So I would say if you've got questions on legislation or the legislative process, let's take those up now. And then after that, then we'll segment to open forum, meaning anything outside of public policy or legislative topics, we'll take those questions. And I've got, some questions that people have posed that we'll come back to at, based on kind of where they fit into the subject matter. So I know some of you have some open forum questions. I'll get to those. But if you've got a legislative question, if you want to do a Q&A, or you can do a live question. So I know Mickey Castor, University Village, has a question, I believe so. Mrs. Castor, I think if you unmute, we can take up your live question.
I had pushed unmute anyway. Oh, you said that Eric Thorne has a 21-page analysis in more layman's term. Is this going to be available to our chapters?
Yes, we're going to post it on the website, and then we are also we can electronically send it out to the chapter presidents. The layman's terms documents is about 11 pages. The other document is the broader budget and finance handbook, which is about 80 pages, because it's got some examples and some templates in there. But both documents are updated. The 11-page one is definitely easier to follow just because of the length of it. But yes, that is ready. And we can work to get that out in the next few days to the chapter presidents. And I would suggest we'll do electronic, just because it's that way you can share it with your boards in your email chains. But we will also post it probably under the new issues or hot issues section of the FLiCRA website. So.
Okay, a follow-up to that. Does that analysis include all of those new requirements for disclosure that you went through?
It does.
I couldn't keep up.
Yes, no, it does. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
It does. It has it, and it has it in chronological order of in terms of the section of law. But yes, that is there in its entirety in that smaller document. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, second question, please. We try to go to the legislative delegation meeting every year. Do you know, and of course, since the session doesn't convene until March, I'm sure they won't do it before January. Do you have any knowledge of how they're going to handle the delegation meetings under the current circumstances?
I mean, based on what we know, I know one county, Duval County, for example, meets next week. They're doing virtual, at least for public testimony. So, we'll try to monitor as best we can how they're going to approach it. I mean, expectation is, depending on what county it is and what their infection rates are, some may be able to do public, in-person public testimony. Others we're probably going to have to do virtual. I mean, just like you've seen with city and county commissions. Every county's done differently based on what's happening with their trends. And but my expectation is, one, majority of county delegations will probably do virtual, at least for their first meeting. And then we are working on that should have in the next day or two basically, if you're interested, which many of you do this, in testifying at your delegation meeting or meetings, depending if there's more than one, we'll have basically what we call kind of our one-pager of public policy objectives for FLiCRA for the 2021 session that we can circulate out to the chapter presidents as well, and hopefully be able to do that for most of you by tomorrow or Monday at the latest, because I know some of those meetings are starting to happen in the next week or two. I think, like you said, depending on what county it is, some will happen later. But I do know some are starting to go ahead and schedule their meetings.
Okay, thank you very much, Bennett.
I think Indian River has their hand raised.
Has been waving at you. Do you see Jim?
Let me get to the question from the floor first. We had a question from Indian River first.
Indian River Estates, right. Richard Lutz from FLiCRA West here in Vero Beach.
Yes, sir.
There was an article recently in the Resident Connection with respect to the use of immunity waivers. And clearly the position of FLiCRA, as I understand it, for the state is that we should be opposed to this conceptually at this juncture. The question I have, well, first of all, I assume that's correct, but the question really is, are there any CCRCs in the FLiCRA family that are currently using these type of waivers?
Sure. It's a pretty, there's a lot of facets to the question. So, and I'll try not to make it confusing because it is confusing.
I understand it conceptually. So
yeah, right. Yeah. So just for the attendees, so you've got the issue of immunity from lawsuits from a what I call a legislative standpoint. So at this stage, nothing has changed in terms of current law, in terms of liability. So those two committees I mentioned earlier are related to the pandemic, and one in the House and one in the Senate will convene during the spring and tackle that in addition to other COVID-related topics. So like business immunity in general, has not been addressed, quote unquote, at this stage. There's a lot of people that want it addressed, but it hasn't been. But it will. But I'm going to get to the waivers if you let me. So let me talk about the waivers. But let me also restate FLiCRA's position. FLiCRA's position is that they submitted to the governor in May of 2020 is that they, as a board, do not believe blanket immunity should be granted. So blanket immunity, would still, quote unquote, allow if there is a case where you've got gross negligence, malfeasance, if you will, malicious, intent, that those kind of claims, even during COVID time period, should have due recourse in the court. So that's how we, quote unquote, are defining blanket immunity. Meaning, because blanket immunity means like, even if it was gross negligence, quote unquote, depending on how legislation is written, potentially would not be subject to a lawsuit. And we believe that that's not appropriate. So on the waivers, there's a couple of things that have occurred. So based on what we know, and when I say we've had continual conversations with Leading Age, as you would expect, going back from March to now. Out of the 71 CCRCs in Florida, we're only aware of one management company that put forth liability waivers. And I think that encompassed about 10 or 11 communities in total, somewhere in that ballpark. Those liability waivers were put forth in those communities. FLiCRA had communication with the residents in those communities. We had communication with Leading Age on that topic, and then Leading Age actually convened a teleconference or a video conference with FLiCRA, Leading Age, and that management company for us to articulate some of the concerns we had with the way the wording was in those liability waivers. In a few of those communities, based on what we've seen play out, is they substituted the liability waivers for informed consent waivers, or informed consent acknowledgments, if you will. And those, were provided to residents. They were provided to people coming in as guests and or vendors that come in to provide services to the community, like landscapers, those kind of things if they've got external service providers. Informed consent is not a waiver. Informed consent is saying you're entering a long-term care community campus where you may have the potential for broader exposure to COVID based on our demographics. But that also articulates, some of the protocols that are in place, if you will, to what's occurring in those campuses. The liability waiver, again, we're only aware of one management company that submitted the liability waivers. The way those waivers were worded, because we did review them and our inside general counsel reviewed the language, they did not waive a resident's rights or their family's rights to file a lawsuit if there was gross negligence. That's the way that particular waiver was worded. So it still provided recourse if there was a claim that met the gross negligence, threshold, if you will. We did, talk to the individual communities that received those. People made independent decisions. I do know in many cases residents chose to sign them. Some residents chose not to sign them, and then some residents signed them initially and then asked for them to be rescinded. I do know in our conversation with that management company that their intention is that if you signed a waiver, if you're in one of those communities, that those waivers are only intended to be in force, quote unquote, during the pandemic. Now, what I would say is, I think for all intents and purposes, we're still in the pandemic, so that we're not over it. So, it probably would be sometime in 2021, probably summer at the earliest, once universal vaccines are available to the broader population and infection rates go down. So if you signed one of those, what we do know is you have the right to ask to rescind it now. So that's a right you have. If you choose to do it later, or you just want to let it expire on its own accord, be aware, as we get towards the spring, early summer, if you haven't gotten communication from management related to that, if you actually signed one of those, I would start to ask that question of, are you going to rescind this and effectively, deem them null and void, because they are not intended to be permanent, meaning like they're on file for 20 years, because hopefully we won't be in a pandemic for, beyond 2021. So I'm happy to take some additional questions you might have related to what I shared.
Can I just follow up on that, please?
Sure.
I was the one who originally asked the question. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you sign a waiver, you cannot waive gross negligence by law. So signing a waiver to eliminate an action in gross negligence would not be upheld by the state law. Is that correct?
Effectively, you're correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yes.
Okay. With respect to so when you're dealing with a waiver, you're not really practically dealing with gross negligence, because once you start talking gross negligence, you convolute the picture a little bit. You're talking about ordinary negligence. And if you're talking about ordinary negligence and you sign a waiver, there should be, I think, some type of consideration on the other end for relieving you of that particular protection. And in the situation that you cited with respect to that one CCRC, I wonder whether or not that CCRC would be obligated to provide some additional benefit to the person who signed that waiver, or conversely, the question would be, would the people who don't sign the waiver be penalized in some fashion as a result of their not following through on that and increasing the CCRC's liability?
You've got a myriad of questions. I probably won't be able to answer all of them, to be frank with you, because I'm just within the time. What I would share in general, and we can probably do a follow-up in the resident connection too, to address some of these scenarios. But let me at least hit a couple. So we will probably have, my expectation is we will have some discussion with the Governor's Continuing Care Advisory Council on this topic next week, and at least pose the question from the Office of Insurance Regulation, how they interpret some of the questions you just posed as it relates to the regulatory frameworks. And I do want to clarify, it was not just one CCRC, it was multiple CCRCs, but it was one management company that operates multiple CCRCs. So I just want to clarify that. The question related to quote unquote a reduction or restriction or access to services if you didn't sign the waiver, that has occurred. I haven't heard much about that in the last 45 days. Doesn't mean it's not happening. I'm just saying we haven't had communities reach out to us, residents reach out to us on it. I know early on there was discussion whereby if somebody didn't sign the waiver, that they would not be allowed back in the dining room. They would not be allowed on like the public transportation, like the bus going to the pharmacy or the grocery store, those kind of things, if they didn't sign the waiver. I have not heard lately whether that's actually been enforced or not. So I would be helpful to know if you're in one of those communities to contact us to let us know what's actually happening real time, in those communities, because we haven't heard one way or the other. If the premise of, if you're not able to utilize some services that are part of your residency agreement because you didn't sign a waiver, and should there be some provision for recourse or a credit, if you will, because you're not able to use some of the services that you paid for, that's something where we believe that we would need to help work with your resident councils on how to approach some of those strategies. Because it correlated, although you didn't raise the question, it is correlated to another question that we got posed is, with COVID protocols, waiver or not, many of you, obviously had housekeeping services that were discontinued, for a period of time. And, quote unquote, those services are something you pay for, or they're included in your contract provisions. And there were questions from residents, well, should I get credit, towards, a credit towards my maintenance fee because we didn't get to use those services. Again, those are in many respects resident council questions that you would want the resident council as the local entity to really tackle, because you're the boots on the ground, if you will, in that standpoint. And from a 651 standpoint, the resident council is the body under the law that should be addressing some of those topics. And I'm going to say this nicely, to put pressure on your providers to reach some type of, middle ground or reasonable solution. Will they do it in every occasion? That it depends on the issue. But if they're not getting pressure from the resident council, which is the official body, and it's only from individual residents, not to say they don't have to answer and have meetings with you, but I would encourage you to really, one, have your council do its job. And if the council doesn't understand what its role is, have them contact us. We'll walk them through what their legal duties are, because they're pretty clear in the statute. And I know some of you have effective councils. Some of you, based on your interpretation, have less than effective councils. But the bottom line is that you've got to find a way to hopefully find that structure to help work in your favor. And that's why we put it in the law in the first place. So, I mean, I didn't answer all of Larry's questions, but I want to make sure we get some other questions too.
Well,
But
if you follow up with the resident connection article that amplifies or clarifies some of the issues, that would be most important.
Okay.
Because we could use that internally to communicate with our resident councils. In other words, we could use that as a foundation for
Right.
a discussion. And I think that would be a very good thing. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I think Indian River, well, I skipped Jim because Jim's had his hand up a long time ago about delegation meetings. So I probably should come back to him first. Yeah. Jim, you got it. There you go.
Yes. In Duval County, our delegation meeting is on the 23rd. And if you're going to speak, you have to fill out a form by Monday, the 16th. And the meeting is a public meeting, and it will be in accordance with CDC guidance, i.e. you're going to have to maintain 6 feet apart, and you're only allowed to talk 2 minutes, which means all you can do is basically introduce yourself. So the packet becomes very important as a means of communicating your delegation. That's all I have.
Thank you, Jim. Bennett, are you there?
Yes, I'm just looking at the questions. I know Indian River had a question that they posed probably a few minutes back. So I'm going to just try to work through the meetings based on the chronology when they got submitted. So, Mr. Wade, let me
Yes,
see if I can.
have a question. What is the statutory requirement of resident councils meeting or communication or whatever? What is the actual statutory requirement for the residents council?
As it relates to your specific question, the law is silent on how they meet and when they meet. And the reason for that is the state of Florida did not want to create one universal standard for every resident council. It's no different than your FLiCRA chapters. Some of you meet monthly, some of you meet quarterly, those types of things. So your resident council bylaws, which is your governing document, would stipulate, generally speaking, the minimum amount of times the council would meet during the course of a year. And then obviously provisions of how topics or issues get presented, those types of things. So the 651 from the legal standpoint is silent on, how many people are on your council, when they meet, those kind of things. That should be addressed in your council bylaws. And we can definitely help work with you if there's areas where we can help provide some language to improve your bylaws, that if you want to make changes at the local level, we can do that. But the state did not want to create a universal standard, just because part of it's because your campuses look vastly different. You've got some campuses that are high rises with 120 residents, and then we've got communities with 1,000 residents, in apartments and villas. And so they recognize each campus looks vastly different, and they didn't want to create a standard that just, didn't take into consideration the differences of what your campuses look like and how many residents there actually are. Yeah. Now, there just a one question, just not related to councils, but there is Mr. Neff, I think appropriately, wanted to make sure people understood and remembered this. You do see, management does still have to have a quarterly meeting with the residents. That has not changed. The piece that has changed during COVID is the state gave temporary approval for management to do those meetings virtually, or provide written information related to town hall topics. I expect that will be, continued at least for most of the first quarter of 2021. But again, that's a question that we're going to ask next week to the regulatory body next week at the council meeting.
So Bennett, what recourse do councils have, resident councils have, assuming that management does what it's supposed to do by law and is revealing the documents they need to and giving the resident council the information that they have to, but they're very clear that they don't want to hear back from the residents, that residents will have no influence on management. Is there any recourse that the residents have?
It depends on the topic. So it's topic based. That's part of it. And then, there is an arbitration mediation process under the law, which has been in existence for over 25 years. Hasn't been used a lot, but that process is there. And, we definitely have had more inquiries about arbitration mediation this year than, previous years, just for some of these scenarios that we're, discussing is, if you get to an impasse, then what do you do? So, there are some other things, that relate to that. And so. And again, I think everything is based on the facts and circumstances of the scenario. So I would encourage you, if you're, which we kind of do it in an open setting here, but it's important to have all the facts and circumstances that we can have to help give you direction on which is the best path to take based on what's actually occurring, and also what the topic or subject is, because there's different answers based on the topic and the dynamics of what's occurring, either usually negative, not positive, if you will. So reach out to us and we're happy to walk through what your legal options are and then your non-legal options, so that people can make an informed decision on that. So I transitioned off of legislative. We're at the noon hour, but I know we said we would adjourn about 12:15. So we have additional time for open questions. I know that there were some questions related to kind of just going back to some of the ones from earlier this morning on membership. And if I need to go back to the housekeeping discussion, we can do that. I know I referenced it briefly. I'm just trying to see if there's any other pre-submitted questions that I failed to mention, but I don't see any. So we've got two. Ms. Nichols, I think, yes, you are one of the folks that had some follow-up from this morning. So if you want to unmute. You can unmute Ms. Nichols. There we go.
Okay, I'm interested in knowing from either Region 5 or Region 7 directors, approximately how many of those CCRCs have their dues collected automatically by management?
How many CCRCs have?
Lauren, do you want to take that? Just because, we've got the summary sheet and we probably could answer that fairly quickly.
You said Region 5, is that correct?
Region 5 and 7. Yeah, 5 and 7.
Because they're so large.
Yeah.
So I think in Region 5, the majority of the chapters go through the community, meaning we receive one check from the community. I think only maybe 2 out of that region do not collect dues through the community.
In Region 7, it's less. Region 5 has the highest concentration of automated dues amongst the regions, I think. Region 7, just because you've got a diverse group of owner-operators in Region 7, I think it's, and obviously there's been some ownership changes in the last year in Region 7, or management company changes. So that number had some fluctuation because of some of those transitions. But Region 5 definitely has like Lauren said, the majority are doing that. And I think, Lauren, I know the number changes. Yes. And I think we're over 25 communities on automated dues now.
I think, yeah, we're definitely close to that.
All right, because we have a recent ownership change in January 2020, and now we've gotten to know them, and we're considering asking them if they would collect our dues automatically, because it would boost our membership. Frankly, it really would. And the residents want it done that way. So thank you for your answer.
Okay, great. I'm just typing one of our other questions that was an email question. So. Okay, let me see here. I know there was a question I forgot to answer. I did it kind of right out of the break, but we're not going to give you the actual, like the real number, because we've got some people that are participating in groups. But we had 145 registrants amongst 30 chapters, but we know we have more than that were participating in small groups in some of the auditoriums that are distant. So based on the kind of the email list of people, we believe we're probably about 180 people participated for most of this morning, so which is pretty good turnout. So let me go back here and see. Just want to see if I've got some questions. The housekeeping, I'm going to just, on the housekeeping topic, we'll probably do a survey on the housekeeping topic just to see statewide how many of you had interruption on housekeeping, and then what was the duration of time where that occurred, just to give us a timeline and some data. Not to open up a can of worms, but that's what I'm about to do. We will probably be publishing some information on average monthly maintenance fee increases. We shared with your board that historically statewide monthly maintenance fee increases have generally been in the 3 to 3.5% range for the last 20 years. There is some expectation, given COVID impact, that statewide average might be closer to the 4% range, but we don't know that to be the case yet, but just we'll continue to monitor what that looks like and go from there. So I know Mr. Hughes has been waiting patiently.
And your treasurer, Jim, is waiting for you also.
Okay. Yeah, so Mr. Hughes, let me see if I can get you. Lauren, can you unmute Mr. Hughes on your end?
There, how's that?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you. Yes, sir.
Okay, first of all, I don't actually have a question, but a couple of quick comments. First of all, I want to thank you, Bennett, and Lauren, for all of the work that you've done this year. I know when I've had questions for either one of you, even off hours, I get responses back almost immediately. It's just incredible, the quick, responsive, and competent help that we get. It's just it's amazing when you see competence in this world, in the service area. Is to be highly commended and recognized. So I want to thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
And I have two quick comments that came to mind when Ramsey was making his report. Number one was he commented some about the available assistance during these lockdowns for the independent living folks in our CCRCs. And I want to say that at Penny Retirement Community, we had some adjustments made by our administration for that assistance, but it went on. All the independent living folks continued to get nurse responders coming to our units when we needed them. In fact, I was one of those that needed one very badly. I was in a dire situation at one time a few months ago, and my wife wouldn't have been able to handle it. Very, very grateful. And we are a CCRC. One of those C's is care. And I think that any of our providers that cut off medical services to independent living residents in their communities should be greatly embarrassed. That's unconscionable. I am highly offended by that. I just can't imagine it. So that's my comment in that area. And somewhat of a related area is that Ramsey also commented on the fact that our independent living residents are living in their homes longer. And so they tend to need more assistance the longer they live in those homes, and accommodations both for the physical facilities are needed, and also the supports are needed in more ways than in previous years. But there's also another issue that comes up, and our CEO commented to me about this, is that when people transition from independent living into assisted living, after having lived so longer in independent living, they come into the assisted living facilities in much worse shape than they used to. So they're having, in our assisted living facilities here, to provide much more help, almost to the nursing level that they didn't formerly used to have to do. So our assisted living services have a much different complexion and much more involved for our residents in those facilities than they used to be. End of comment and end of soapbox. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, I think, Mr. Jandro, you had a question, correct?
Yes, I'm going to give you some specific information as it pertains to Brookdale and LCS. 2 years ago, as a Brookdale community, I went to management and asked them to do membership for FLiCRA. I got support from on the automated dues subject through the community. I had support going up to the area vice president, but when I went to corporate, Charlie Bird specifically said no. And he said no because of the impact it would have on the local CFOs and business office. Subsequently, 1st of February, all the 9 Brookdale communities in the state of Florida were purchased by Health Peak, and management was moved to LCS. It so happens that same Brookdale individual called Charlie Bird, who worked for Brookdale, is now working for corporate at LCS. And when LCS assumed responsibility of the 9 Brookdale communities, Charlie Bird then became part of that management supervision at corporate LCS. I have not subsequently gone back on that issue because I'm not sure politically I can win it, since I got to go to the same person. Case closed.
Let me see if there's any other questions on any new questions. I mean, some of the questions that were posed, I definitely will reach offline on some of communities that were affected by the waivers. I know you got some questions on some of that. I'll do some personal follow-up. And then I know based on our conversations in the open forum, I'll address some resident connection content related to some of those scenarios as well. I'm just trying to see if anybody else has their hand raised. Looking at the board to see if anybody on the board has their hand raised, because I have to look at that too. Don't see, Madam President, I don't see any additional questions. And I don't see any additional hands raised, but it's kind of my cue. If people do have them, this is probably the time to do it. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left before the 12:15 hour. So.
It'd be a cool time to consider adjourning.
Yes, Madam President, I'll turn it over to you for sort of closing remarks. Again, just want to thank you and John for their great service on the board, but I'll turn that over to you for any final comments.
I just want to say thank you to everybody for your participation. Thank you for all the attendees who participated. This was not easy. And your patience is very much appreciated. And my screen is blocking up on me. Sorry. But I think this was a fruitful meeting. And as always, I and Bennett and Lauren and any of the board members are available if you have further questions or suggestions of things that you think that FLiCRA should address and conversations that we should have. Please contact us at any time, and our contact information is in the communications that you get at any time from FLiCRA. So with that, I accept a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Oh.
Thank you. I heard two. That means a move and a second here. John seconded also. Thank you again to our outgoing members, and welcome to those coming on the board. Farewell all. Stay well.
Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome.
Good meeting.
Big thank you to you, Bennett.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Bennett, this is Ramsey. I'm going to get with you next week about a couple of issues after the meeting with OIR.
Great. Perfect. Be happy to do it.
Okay, and Bennett, real quick, when you mentioned the numbers of the states that were down in revenue, what was Florida again? Was it 22 billion?
No, that was California. Florida, let me get that sheet. What did I do with it? I had it.
Yeah, California was 42, I thought you said.
Yes, Florida over the next 3 years. So it's 2020, 21, and 22. So 3 years, not 2. Projected to be down about close to 8 billion.
Oh, 8. Oh, okay, great.
Over the 3 years. Yeah.
Over 3. Okay, got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. We'll sign off. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks. Great
Thank
job.
you.
Great job. Thank you.